Jai Gurudev, everybody. So welcome to our third live webinar in this series, where we started with our course on Sanatana Dharma, on Hinduism, and then consequently we've been going on every 2 weeks, breaking down the various tenets that make up the foundation of Sanatana Dharma. Last time we did the Atma. This time today we're encountering a bigger topic, literally and figuratively, Brahman, God. In Hinduism, how he is perceived. Now, first of all, couple of announcements. It is Krishna Janmashtami today, so happy Krishna Janmashtami to everybody. It's been a busy day here at the ashram already, and I just conducted a lecture on Krishna for the last 3 hours, and so I'm still in a teaching mode, so we can go straight into it and continue in a good way. Tonight we'll have the Krishna Janmashtami celebrations in the temple, so we're very much looking forward to that. Secondly, last time in the Atma course, we did mention that some of these videos would go offline after some time. However, the majority of you reached out and said that you really hoped that the video content could stay up a little bit longer. You needed time to study, to go through it, and I empathize with you, especially because the videos that we've done so far are pretty long, 3-hour sessions, 2-hour sessions, because we're covering these important foundational concepts. And so we've decided to keep them online for the time being. I don't want to commit to any time frames or anything of that nature, but for now, they are online, and I'm sure you'll be profiting from that, okay? So the next thing that I want to say is that once we're done with this series of 7, what we will do is 7 tenets. What we will do is slightly shorter webinars, maybe a half hour, so that they're more digestible and you can consume them in sort of smaller chunks. Okay, so it's important that for the beginning now we continue to do them in this longer format, because it's really, really important for your own education that you receive these concepts in their complete form. If I was to break this up too much, you really wouldn't be understanding enough to carry forward for your 2-week breaks between seminars, and that therefore means that for now it stays at this length. Later on we'll shorten them up. Okay, so let's get started. Understanding Brahman, the nature of God in Hinduism. Now, Hinduism teaches, the Upanishads, the Vedic literature teaches very clearly that there is one absolute reality, one being. And this is referred to in the Vedic literature by the term Brahman. And so at this stage of the course today, Brahman will be introduced as a sort of neutral term designed to refer to the supreme reality or the absolute truth, okay? Later on in today's course, we'll be clarifying that further and creating sort of distinguishments in the concepts of God, so that terms like Brahman will be properly understood. But for now, Brahman just means the absolute truth, okay? Now, for us to understand what we're referring to when we talk about God or the absolute truth or any of these things in general, it's important that we define the terms. So, absolute is, in the English language, a word derived from Latin, which means free from any limiting conditions or restraints. Now, that's going to be really important, because when we talk about limiting conditions or restraints, one of the major limiting conditions and restraints that we have is our language, words. The suitability of words to express something that is by definition unrestrained just seems obviously improper. So here we have the first obstacle to any kind of discussion about God, that the tools that we have at our disposal are essentially insufficient or faulty to actually properly represent the topic that we want to discuss. An unavoidable problem, unfortunately, for us. Now, by definition, if something is absolute, and we've understood that absolute means without any limiting conditions or restraints, then essentially what we're saying is that it's beyond all concepts, thought processes, as well as the previously mentioned language issue. So note what I'm saying now, that the absolute must by definition be beyond our conceptual thoughts, beyond thought processes even. And so no matter how refined our philosophy gets, no matter how clear my expression may be to you today, it is very, very, very clear to me from the offset that essentially whatever I explain to you today will only be a conceptual representation of God. It will not be a factual depiction of the Godhead or the supreme absolute truth in a way that will do it justice and merit. We are just approximating ourselves to it, doing the best we can, in a sense, with the limited resources that we have at our disposal. Okay, so I really wanted to say that so that nobody comes afterwards and says, how can you limit God to a concept? We can't. We can only do our best to create compatible concepts that make experience more likely to happen. Okay? Having defined absolute, so when I talk about absolute truth, you know what I mean. The next word to define is Brahman. As I said, Brahman was used in, or is the most commonly used term to depict this absolute truth in the Vedic literature. And the word Brahman literally means the immensity. So that which is immense. Immense also with the connotation of that we cannot see its boundaries, its limits. Okay, so that is an important connotation to take into consideration when we talk about the immensity as the definition of Brahman. This Brahman is presented in the Upanishads as being ultimately unknowable to the mind. And this is a point that Krishna references in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, he mentions that this supreme truth, no human mind has ever known it. Human minds cannot rationally come to this understanding of this supreme truth, the mind itself being the issue, the limiting agent in this equation. Okay, so that's the first slide done, and that's the first point to consider. Now, I've introduced the concept of Brahman as being equating to this absolute truth, the topic of today's discussion. But the question remains, who or what is Brahman? And that's fundamentally what we're here to discover today. So according to the Upanishads, one of the other features of Brahman is that it is that from which all manifestation proceeds from. So everything has its origin in Brahman. So Brahman is therefore also termed sometimes as the ground of all being. And this lends into the next point, which is that in the Vedas, the descriptions afforded to Brahman, that Brahman is the sustaining repository of all beings, Brahman is the ground of all beings, Brahman is this, Brahman is that. The appropriate terms that we come to define Brahman as, the most common one of them is called Narayana. Now, I don't necessarily mean Narayana as a specific personality at this stage. That is a later association that we will make in today's lecture. But I mean the word Narayana. Narayana, as a word, can mean many, many things, but one of its meanings is the ground of all being, one of the exact descriptions given to Brahman in the Vedic literature. So to recap the thought process, Brahman is presented as the absolute truth in the Vedic literature. Brahman itself is defined as the immensity, but Brahman is described using various expressions in the Vedic literature, one of them being the ground of all being, the substance or the foundation from which all beings spring forth from. Now, the Sanskrit equivalent of the ground of all being is Narayana. So therefore, the Sri Vaishnavas emphasized Brahman's name as Narayana. Okay? Now, having said this, one more thing. I mentioned earlier that Brahman is, in a sense, beyond mental thought processes, beyond concepts, beyond language. But when we talk about Brahman, another word that's important to associate to it is that it is inexpressible and inconceivable. Why do I add these two words? Inconceivable meaning that what we are able to see, that requires, for example, our sight and mind, is too limited in comparison to something like God. So not only our language is inappropriate to encapsulate God, but also our other sense organs, our other faculties, mind faculties, and more. And so I'm really trying to drill home this concept that we're going to be using metaphors, we're going to be using commonly understood terminology, forms, images to depict that which I am acknowledging from the absolute start of this lecture cannot be contained by these things, okay? So, really hope that this has gone through crystal clear.